Alternative title, Soulful White Boy Saves the World. I'm about to live so fucking hard right now, boys, you don't even understand. Section 1, Goonicide. You probably do know, but if you don't know, the UK government recently passed a piece of legislation called the Online Safety Act. This piece of legislation, amongst other things, made it so that now, if you want to have a good old tug on the tinkle, you now have to submit an ID to Belgians of all people. I mean, I'm not even convinced it's a real fucking country, you know what I mean? And more importantly, as part of this, anything deemed adult, so stuff about suicide or addiction and things. I have been told the healing powers of Reddit are unmatched when it comes to suicidal ideation. I'm not particularly convinced, but it probably helps some people, so there we are. I am somewhat dubious, however, as its usage as a general sociological tool. Got a licence for that wank, mate. Yeah, the Yanks love that old knee slapper, and the sad reality of it is that it's just fucking true. Where are the wank licences? Coming soon to a county near you. British people, as a general rule, are sort of foaming at the mouth, waiting for anything that Rupert Murdoch has told them makes him feel icky that week. And that's what's going to be on the agenda, boys. Speaking of mouth foam, XL Bullies, a somewhat famous dog breed over on this side of the pond. A dog breed that not last year was banned by the British. Yes, indeed, banned. That is true. In the UK, we decide to ban dogs after a rather upsetting attack on a child. In a move that can only be described as a fucking classic, the British deemed it necessary to genocide all of a certain dog breed. You might be wondering, in this example, how many people did die in dog attacks that year? 7. 7 people in a population of 70 million. Now, obviously, I would prefer these people have not to have died. And by the way, that is not 7 people killed by XL Bullies, that is 7 people killed by any dog. I think there were about 3 or 4 killed by XL Bullies, so disproportionate for sure, but is it really the purview of legislation? That's all I'm saying. The cycle in British politics sort of goes something like this. Something bad, but out of the ordinary, happens to little Jeremy. British media then decide to cover the fuck out of it because the victim's family, understandably upset, starts some campaign, this sort of never again campaign about this incident. Facebook boomers then get to work at a pace rapidly approaching retirement, such banging arguments as, would you rather have XL bullies or children die? And then the British politicians, of course, concerned with nothing else but their sort of general view in the media, then decide to go to Parliament and tip-tap away on their keyboards and get it written up into law. Jeremy's Law, as it will now be referred to henceforth. And I will say, while this culture is incredibly infuriating, it does mean that we have fewer toxic chemicals in our food, and it's also why we wouldn't defend private prisons as a sort of defence of freedom, or putting chemicals in the water that turn the frickin' frogs gay. It did happen, apparently. It was like hermaphrodism, but fair enough. Maybe don't be doing that. By the way, if you were wondering, we did have dog licences in England up until about 1990. I went and checked the polling on this. A vast majority of the British public support the reintroduction of these licences. Got a licence for that dog, mate. It's just real, bro. It's just real. Interestingly, the vibe of this recent porn crackdown, let's say, has been a bit different in vibe to this. It's sort of suspiciously come out quite quietly and wasn't directly influenced by some sort of Jeremy situation. But the general arguments have been and will be the same. Do you want kids to have access to porn? Kids are literally killing themselves. You are a nonce if you don't support it. The true classics. The classic rhetorical moves, for sure. No sense in the British public of reasonability and scope. Just bad things are bad and we must reduce them being bad. And any measures that get us there are perfectly justifiable. But I will say there are some very good arguments for restricting the widespread access of internet pornography, much like there probably is with XL bully dogs. I just thought that was a funny example. You know, it's bad for the people who film the porn, erectile dysfunction, no hose, importantly, which is really a fucking nightmarish demographic trend. The fact that you're sat there gooning away will reduce the chances that you actually have to go out and interact with a femoid. Getting increasingly depraved. This one's a weird one, right? Furry porn back in my day would not have been tolerated. Yes, we do kink shame on this channel. You would not be wanking off to toasters and animals
if you hadn't have seen porn at the age of 11, probably. And again, I need to reiterate this point. It is fucking terrible for the people who do it, sex trafficking, etc. The stats on that are pretty horrifying. Also, on top of this, very fucking addictive, which sort of exacerbates all the above conditions. Mainly the erectile dysfunction thing. That's mainly the one that's going to hit a lot of the guys in the audience. Quell your gooning, lads. You know what I mean? Just because the government is stopping you from doing it doesn't mean you should do it out of spite. You know what I mean? Now, importantly, is this a reason that one should ban ID check internet pornography? The arguments for that sort of go as follows. VPNs exist, so you can sort of circumvent it pretty easily. Porn is just fine, actually. The classic liberal argument, let's say. You know, it's fine, it doesn't hurt anyone. It does, by the way, if so indirectly. It doesn't hurt anyone directly, so it's fine, I should just be allowed to do it. The government are taking away my civil liberties, infringing on certain freedoms that I should be allowed to do in principle. Sort of comes down to two things, really. Enforcement, how realistically you're going to actually be able to stop people from doing the thing you want them to not do, and whether they should be able to do it. Is that the purview of the government or something? The rest of this video is broadly going to be about the second one, but on the first one, I don't know about you guys, but I don't know how many 12-year-olds have the monetary funds to buy a VPN subscription. Maybe there are like some free ones online. I don't fucking know. Either way, I feel like you're definitely going to reduce the number of fucking kids looking at porn. That's all I'm saying about that. The VPN thing, I'm fed up of fucking Redditors telling me how great VPNs are. They can go suck a dick, to be honest. Which arguably will probably be better for their sex life, given that they're so rigorously defending gooning. But also, let's just be clear here, Redditors. That's kind of just how laws work. Murder is illegal, but you could still murder someone if you would like. The point of laws is that you're trying to make it painful in consequence, so you put them in jail or fine them or whatever for it, or you make it difficult to do, so you restrict the access to things, right? Broadly though, it's more the first one, because the second one's quite hard to do. You could pretty much make anything you want in your own free time. In short, this video is, I'm fed up of the British duking freedoms away over 30p, and also the Redditors need to shut the fuck up a bit. That's basically the point. Spoiler alert, but we're going to go through an entire fucking rigmarole in a video essay because it's YouTube watch time engagement, you know. We're going to go through a history. Am I pro this porn thing? Probably not, but like, we need to probably do something about the porn. That is really the take, but you know, the video's interesting. Carry on watching.
That they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Look at that. Beautiful, that. Fucking different colour lights now, boys. Beautiful. Fucking very high budget operation we run here at Inquesting HQ. Oh, that's a bit low. Now, as a wee internet scrolling, voice crackling, fat maxing teenager, I thought to myself, wow, people are very annoying and authoritarian. Why do people care if people are gay or something, or like what religion people are? You should just leave people alone or something. Or more realistically, why do I have to go to school? And boom! A young libertarian was born. I know, guys, not my proudest moment, but that's where we're at. But it shaped the lib that I am today. You might have guessed it. I was very much in the early stages of the alt-right pipeline. I emphasise their early stages. We weren't at Richard Spencer levels, but we might have perused the old Sargon of Akkad video. That's all I'll say on that matter. But interestingly, I did not become a neo-Nazi. So why did that happen? Well, mainly it's because the solutions I was searching for and the things that upset me were pretty clear from the start. Let's elucidate further. I have cared about freedom for a very, very long time, as long as I can remember, really. But it didn't start there. It started as a general sense of empathy. Me, an empath, I distinctly remember learning about slavery or having to watch stuff about the crucifixion of Jesus and just having it ruin my entire month. You know what I mean? Insofar as I would literally fake being sick to avoid having to watch stuff about this stuff. I'm a bit of a fucking pussy. And because of this, I just sort of started delving into this problem of evil generally, not that problem of evil, and the cause of evil. I came down to the perspective, based on the ideas that were around me at the time, of freedom being the number one reason, or lack thereof, that bad things happen to people. I feel like this doesn't need defending too much. I think largely humans give a fuck about freedom in and of itself. It's why prisons exist, or why every movement since the French Revolution has cared about my freedom, or something like this. You can't all be doing freedom, boys. I fucking see what you're doing. Yeah. Whatever. Enough of the fucking history of my political awakening, let's say. Let's do some hypothetical examples. Just see how you feel about them. Number one, someone comes to your house and kills you and or your loved ones. Number two, someone comes and kidnaps you and gets you to work at their factory for free, where you can't leave. Slavery, as it's known in the business. Number three, someone says if you don't work in their factory for pay, they'll kill you. So you are getting paid for the slavery now. Indentured servitude. Maybe not the killing part, but, severe consequence. Someone says you can choose to leave the factory and you get paid, but when you're there, you need to behave by the rules, like you have to stand up and shit. And if you say stuff against the factory, you get fired on site. Someone says you can choose to leave the factory and you get paid, much like the above, but you can say shit about the factory when you get home, but you still have to play by the rules when you're there. Many, many such cases. Number 6, you own the factory, based, and you can leave whenever you want. Obviously, you still get paid, and naturally, you can say whatever you want about the factory. But if you say stuff about the government, you get killed. Number 7, you don't need a factory because we live in luxury gay space communism. But if you say stuff about the government, topped again. And finally, we live in luxury gay space communism, and if you say stuff about the government, nothing happens, you're left alone, whatever. That went on a bit, I get that. But the point I'm trying to illustrate here is the situation at the start of the list are bad. Slavery is bad. And the point of this thought experiment isn't simply that the situations are better, as in the suffering of the people is reducing. It's also that the freedom of the person is increasing. And these things directly correlate. Not always, though, as we'll get into, is that historically speaking, the stuff at the start of the list was substantially more common than the situations at the end of the list, even today, for the vast majority of people. This progression did not happen in and of itself. It was because of liberalism. Right, okay. Arguably, the project of liberalism right from the start was identifying where people aren't free and trying to alleviate that. Freedom here is defined as, I want to do X thing, and then I can do it, or I don't want X thing to happen, and it doesn't happen. Okay, and broadly, the problem as part of this project has been 2 things, mainly. The first one is people not seeing things as infringements on liberty at all, as we'll get to in a second. Secondly, and this is way more common, people thinking that some infringements are justifiable for whatever reason. So, it's okay that I can infringe on freedom of speech in this circumstance, because blah, 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 blah. But also, as we'll get to, that's just kind of necessary. Kind of connects to the last one. People don't even really think in these terms at all, because most people just sort of autopilot through life, from what I can tell. That term being the fundamental liberal axiom, which is you should be left alone to do what you want, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. This is embedded in our society so deeply we don't even see it anymore, but that is the sort of fundamental orienting principle for liberalism at base, I would argue. And yeah, just for all the fucking Marxists who are tip-tap-tapping away on your keyboards, I'm going to get to you in a second. Shut the fuck up. Some examples of values that are based on this underlying value, examples of what we will henceforth refer to as natural rights, these are things that arguably, philosophically speaking, should be left alone no matter what. Number 1, right to roam. You should be left to walk around wherever you want. Number 2, you should be allowed to sleep with whoever you want, sexual liberation. Number 3, choice of labour. I don't know if there's a nice kitschy term for this, but basically you should be allowed to, freedom of association. You should be allowed to work for whoever you want or not work for whoever you want. Number 4, freedom of speech. You should be allowed to say whatever you want, even if people don't like it, etc. Number 5, property rights. You should be allowed to buy and sell things whatever you want, as long as they're not violating other people's natural rights, like you can't sell people, obviously. Number 6, right to bodily autonomy, which is your body shouldn't be fucked with without your consent. After I've said all those very confidently, they're all mostly not true, right? And I know that sounds very spicy after the bodily autonomy one and the free speech things, but yeah, these things aren't true, and I'm going to do some examples in each scenario where we would say an appropriate limit on that freedom is going to be enacted. And I just want to say these examples are extreme. They're for debate bro purposes only. Number 1, right to roam. Obviously, you can't just walk into some geezer's house. People allowed to have their own spaces and you can't just rock up there. But also, you would argue that sort of like military bases are kind of useful. Call me a statist. Number 2, sleep with whoever you want. You can't because you need to get consent, because that violates their bodily autonomy. But also, like, ages of consent and things like this. We put on reasonable restrictions on who you can't sleep with. Number 3, labour. This one's probably more arguable, but it's probably better for society that we do have sort of professional organisations that stop anyone from becoming brain surgeons. I think that's wise. Number 4, freedom of speech. Now, I would once call myself a free speech absolutist. However, there are some very obvious cases where we do infringe on freedom of speech. Many people give the, causing panic, shouting fire in a crowded theatre to cause a riot type business. I honestly think you could still be a bit tismy about it and justify that one. But I think the better one is you're not allowed to distribute child pornography and things like this. But also, you can't sit outside someone's house at 3 a.m. for 5 years with a giant megaphone calling them a wanker. 4, property rights. taxes exist. But also, as I said, you can't just buy whoever you want. You can't buy nuclear bombs, and also not people, as we've already established. Number 6, bodily autonomy. Prison exists. But also, like, people say you can punch people in self-defense. People defend sort of shooting people in wars and stuff, and it can be justifiable. That is very much a violation of bodily autonomy. I'm pretty sure those people don't want to die or be in prison or be punched in the face. The thing that's fascinating in this situation is the above things aren't even seen as contradictions by the average population, I find. I've had to use very extreme examples in a lot of these situations to illustrate why we can infringe on these freedoms. And even those examples probably wouldn't have been seen as contradictions. They're just like, well, of course you can't do that. It's like, well, no, that's not the point. Like, natural rights are saying, even if bad thing happens, I should be allowed to always do a thing. That is what that means. And I think I've proven you don't agree with that. So you might be asking yourself, is he saying we should abandon rights-based thinking altogether? Some might say, no, we should not abandon that. So if you think back to my list of terrible things from before, the evolution from the former things to the latter things was, as I said, not automatic. It was because of liberalism. But those intermediary stages very much were part of liberalism. And as those things happened, we sort of started quelling natural rights to amend them. You know, that kind of indentured servitude where people are forced to get into debt and then pay off the debt in some sort of like forced slavery scenario was very common in the 19th century in America and Britain, sort of across the industrialized world generally, and still is to this day. So what's happening there is that we're saying we're going to defend property rights because we should just allow people to have property rights. That's always true. But then what's actually happening is that it's causing bad situations to happen. And this is where a very important distinction gets developed in liberal thinking. Importantly, liberal thinking, I'm making the point of saying that, lib. This distinction being freedom to do things versus freedom from things. So freedom from would be people forcing you to do a thing. One might argue robber barons are forcing one in much the way a state would, and freedom to is the ability to make alternative choices. Just because the government aren't going to force you to do a thing doesn't mean that your situation doesn't sort of inadvertently force you into it. A lot of these like liberal arguments back in the day used by these aristocrats probably were just a way to maintain power, but these are the arguments that get used, and this is the sort of basis of liberal thinking. So in the case of those robber barons, we saw it fit to go, look, because practically, take notes on that, practically speaking, when we enshrine these property rights above all else, it actually ends up with society being worse. So what we're going to do, we're going to tax you heavily and redistribute capital, and then of course we're going to put like social safety nets and then eventually worker conditions and like force worker labour rights and minimum wages, things like this. And it's in this sort of soup where Marxist ideas come from, right? I think Marx himself saw himself as an evolution of liberalism, and he is, right? He's using the fundamental liberal axiom, which is you should be allowed to do things as long as it doesn't hurt anyone, and he's saying, look, these things, the capital owners, are infringing on liberty, right? The fundamental axiom there is still sort of freedom to do things, freedom from the government, freedom from landlords, freedom from robber barons, things like this. Of course, Marx says ultimately communism, but we'll talk about it later. And I think it's important to make this point as well, because there are many that still sort of autistically die on the hill of rights, whether it be like certain anarchist type people who want to dismantle all hierarchies at all costs, or in the case of Marxists, they would die on the hill of sort of, it's always the case that extracting value from someone's labour is immoral, things like this. I think with all this, I've sufficiently shown why a sort of pure rights-based thinking approach is not the best idea, but we should maintain some natural rights because that is fundamentally why our society is nice. Not that I think many of the licence-loving Brits would need convincing as such. And I also think it's important here to talk about this sort of liberal principle and these underlying liberal ideas that underpin our society. These ideas are so ubiquitous that people don't even see them. Like, even these so-called monarchist types, like you mentioned small bugs and all this, they're not even being monarchists properly, right? They're not real monarchists. Because they're saying, well, look, some people are practically better at stuff, so they should be allowed to rule, and, you know, we should eventually vote them in, or they should basically dominate because they're more competent, and that's what makes it just. But a true monarchist wouldn't even said that historically. It would have just been, your place in society is being a serf, and I am enshrined by God to be the king, so go fuck yourself. And much like if you were truly like a classical thinker, like the Romans or Greeks, it wouldn't be, oh, everyone should be nice and get along, which is effectively what liberalism is. It is, I am powerful and strong, so therefore I can do whatever I want to people, and that right is proven by the fact that I am strong. So the fact that I am strong allows me to do that. Yes, rights are practically curbed, but practically is the important orienting framework here, and secondarily, we should keep attached to this idea of rights and freedoms, because it's fundamentally what will stop Jeff Bezos putting you into his harem, right? Next section, organic systems. Very entertaining title, I know. This is an example of a framework which we can use to practically determine when rights should be curbed, or pretty much any political decision that one might want to enact. So there is this cricket club in my town, one that is positioned just so that it happens to make a very good shortcut when walking across town. Trivial one might say, who cares? Well, the cricketers care because it ruins their very precious, barely alive grass. So, a solution was hatched by the committee members. First, a polite request. Please, good sir, be very polite. Do not walk across our cricket pitch. It ruins our beautiful game, thank you. Did this deter the foliage stompers? Did it, fuck? Then, an easily bypassable fence at one side, but a simple hop, skit and a jump to the left over the wall, and you're in. Shortcut secured. And finally, a significantly harder to bypass fence situated at the other side of the cricket pitch, thus rendering the route irritating and insurmountable to the average person, and foot traffic was broadly eliminated. Now you might say, why am I banging on about this? Well, because this solution shows an amazing intuitive understanding of organic systems and incentives. That being, you might as well have not even bothered asking, just put the fucking fence up, and they'll not bother because it's a pain in the arse. It's important to note here, right? It's not that this fence is impossible to pass. Someone of average athleticism, which I clearly am not, would simply just rather walk around than have the hassle of getting their clothes dirty climbing over this fucking fence. You know, people would somewhat listen to the request because culture itself works as an incentive, ostracization and all this sort of stuff, but broadly, it's the incentive of not having dirty clothes that stopped it. On a small level, you can get away with an honour-based system. For example, in the English countryside, it's not uncommon to see free-range eggs for sale, which is basically these little boxes with eggs in, you put money in, and you take the eggs. There's no one manning this post, and it pretty much works, right? Most people don't steal the money or the eggs. They, play nicely. This ultimately is the ideal situation for all societies, and you'll see it in sort of small family settings. It's effectively not communism, but kind of close, a very high-trust system. And it'll be why that these sort of hunter-gatherer societies are generally more communistic than we are. If you don't believe me, would the egg thing work in the middle of New York? I don't think it would. So the eggs would likely be thrown at passers-by and then redistributed to the lower classes. The local working class here being mixtape artists and freelance pharmacists. This understanding is entirely necessary when trying to construct human systems because it just won't work otherwise, right? And when you're forming your beliefs of trying to predict human behaviour in society, being the lib that I am, you know where I'm going here, right? Markets. Call me a neo-lib. I'm not, but I guess it'll make you feel better. They've just been a fairly resilient and successful form of system for deterring bad behaviour and encouraging pro-social behaviour throughout the globe. Despite the obvious cases where that doesn't happen and, landlord meme, put the landlord meme on top. One of the important things about markets is that they sort of organically developed to some extent, which is, I want things to be fair, I'll give you this thing and you give me this thing. It's quite an intuitive thing to do, You have a nice guitar and your friend has a nice keyboard and you just swap them around. Fair enough, that's very nice. But more importantly than this, they work well because it incentivizes people who otherwise would do bad things to do inadvertently good things to get them. So in the trust-based egg system from before, the psychopath, the antisocial psychopath, will just take all the eggs until the farmer stops producing them because he doesn't want to get his eggs stolen anymore, and then no more eggs for anyone else. But in the system of markets, what ends up happening is if he wants the eggs, he has to go work for them, or he'll have to steal them and get put in prison. You wouldn't for eggs, but, stay with the hypothetical. Back in the good old days, they'd chop his fucking hands off. So if he wants the eggs in this market system, he has to then go get a job as a plumber or some shit, and then do plumbing for people, and he can hate the fuck out of all of his clients and do a bit of a naff job, but ultimately, if he doesn't do a good enough job, he won't get hired anymore. He then has to go back and then pay the farmer for the eggs, so the farmer then has a certain velocity of money that can then pay for other things, and that's also pro-social, pay for more plumbers, etc. And in all of this, no one has to really like anyone, right? The farmer fucking hates this geezer, because this geezer just robbed his eggs for the last 3 months, but at least he's giving him money for it, so it doesn't matter. The thing that makes a resilient system, like a market, is incentives to keep people playing. So in the case of markets, they were quite good because it meant that the wealthy could maintain their wealth, but it also meant that you got a larger and larger middle class because people had the capabilities to move themselves up, and those upper classes were incentivized to behave a bit. Not much, but a bit at least. But it's important to remember that ultimately the most resilient framework is the framework that says, I am the most powerful, so I just take whatever I want and go fuck yourself, and I win. Boo-hoo, right? Which is pretty much why this didn't change for thousands of years of human civilization. It's where you only get small pockets of larger middle classes throughout history, and the majority of human history is, I'm just going to dominate you because I can. Markets have been good for this because they allowed the bandits to keep some level of power. You see this now, landlords, private equity, all these sort of people. To some extent, they actually do provide some service that is seen as valuable in some sense, but you can see that they're set up to where the incentive structure is that people can just exploit. So the landlord knows that you need a house, so he's just going to exploit the fuck out of you. We should have a look at the incentives of that, maybe. Fucking maybe, guys, yeah? You know what I mean? What I'm saying is not to never change a naturally occurring system, because otherwise we'd still be living under the Mongol Empire. The Mongols never conquered England, but you get my point. Make sure that you make the changes incentive aligned. If you don't align them with what people are likely going to do, then they're less resilient and people are just going to rebel and behave otherwise, right? If you think of the example of a desire path, they spent probably a couple grand on this very nice path, but fuck you, I want to get there directly. You could spend all the time in the world talking about this rare species of grass that you're trampling, but ultimately people don't give a fuck, so they're just going to do what they want. As another example of this, I see a lot of sort of feminist historians talk about how the thing that led to the final emancipation of women in the West wasn't actually the suffragette movement. It was actually like home appliances and like dishwashers and washing machines and things becoming widespread, which meant the role of a servile person in the household wasn't as necessary anymore, and the incentives aligned just so that the women could emancipate themselves. And you might say when I'm saying all this, well, how did things change ever? With great fucking difficulty, my friend, which is why I'm making this video. Most of civilizational history is massive slave populations and conquering your neighbours for defence. It's not sort of, let's consider the opinions and rights of other people. It's, fuck you, I have more swords. That is what that is, right? It's why even today, under the capitalism that we live under, there is still large swaths of the human population that are getting fucked by this, because most people do not give a fuck. They're not going to behave nicely just for themselves. They have to behave nicely with incentive, right? So when you stop buying Nestle's products because they starved to death a bunch of women in Africa, or when you stop buying plastic straws because you're worried about turtles for some reason, right? That encourages the corporations to behave. That is the actual effective movement. It's why worker unions and strikes are very effective, because you're using the biggest tool, right? Your tool is, I have power in this way, and their tool is, I have power in this way, which is like capital or whatever. But importantly, it's not going, please sir, please be nice. It's, fuck you, you don't get the thing that you like, and you are incentivized to do that. That is the important bit. That is why strikes are a resilient left-wing tool to conquer power in some sense. In the case of markets, they only became more dominant through mercantilism and things like this after the lower classes started to rebel and kill them in the case of the French. Incredibly based. Or scare them into submission like what happened in England. But importantly here, right, destroying everything and ruining the civilization is a very real risk at all times. That is basically why I'm like the giga liberal. At any point where a system has incentivized structures such that weak getting dominated by strong is not the default mode, that is a fragile system, because it only takes a couple psychopaths to come along and go, fucking hammer. It's why you'll see warlords, racketeering, sex trafficking, all this stuff in every place where a sort of coalesced system is broken down. But this sort of reason is why I'm very, very skeptical of this benevolent leader type idea that you'll see on like the far right or Marxist-Leninist types or whatever, right? It's very silly because you're setting up incentives to where you can be fucked over. The reason for going through that entire liberal view of history was to illustrate, with all of its inaccuracies, why certain ideas developed. They didn't just develop for no fucking reason. They developed as reactions to things to try solve problems that were created by the previous system. Aristocrats were incentivized to exploit the people, so they did, and then markets became more dominant, and then it encouraged capitalists and landlords and stuff like that, and robber barons to exploit people, so they did, and then we solved that problem, so now we'll see bigger corporations exploiting people as much as they can in the case of, let's say, social media, or you'll see sort of like how slaves are used to harvest cocoa beans today, or rare earth minerals, things like this. And now it's our job to set up an incentive structure to where that no longer happens, which, good luck with that, boys, but we're going to do the video anyway. It's in a very long-winded way why I disagree with most theories of the left on this, let's just say. We should understand how power works, and for people that are fucking obsessed with it, you seemingly do not. I don't really give a shit about, like, theories of like true communism or true capitalism. You should just learn from history and what actually happened when you did a thing, and like learn how you can change that. You need to look at practically what are the incentives going to be when you set up X law versus what ideologically do you think is primarily going to happen, right? Like in the case of in the cricket club, I agree with them. People should not be trampling their grass. Be nice guys, right? But ultimately, asking them was a waste of time. Just set up an incentive structure and an organic system to stop them from fucking doing it. And just to linger on the Marxist-Leninism thing, I feel this is just like purely historical denialism at this point. Much like we abandoned the idea of defending property rights in all cases, you should probably abandon the idea that we create like a uniparty state and for some reason they behave nicely. And of course, I'm going to get 14 types of anarchists, syndicalists, whatever the fuck in my comments, but I don't give a fuck, boys. Evolve. Evolve real life. I can't address all these arguments specifically, but I am yet to see a monarchist, fascist, Stalinist type person, and any of these systems that don't rely on pure human kindness won't obviously just snap back to a Darwinist or aristocratic society as soon as a bad boy gets in charge. Systems that allow bandits to fuck off with all the eggs or unify the means of egg production are not very good systems for the majority of people because they incentivize people to exploit them. But the solution to that will not be found in human kindness. It will be found in making incentives that punish people for behaving badly, but not by some form of coalesced power, just sort of by the balances of power as they may. Speaking of authoritarians, however, next section. Why is everyone Stalin now? Now after I've just spent the past 10 minutes talking about how incentives are all that matter, let's all just abandon ideology, this section is actually just about how much ideology matters. So, in fact, the second half of this video is now just why ideology matters. So you might as well just ignore what I just said, hey? But if you were convinced, that is the strategic power of the video essay format in action right there. No, but jokes aside, obviously, ideology is sort of the underlying structure of what is going on. If you saw my previous video about social constructs, you'll understand the sort of importance of generating resilient social constructs like money, let's say, that are based on tangible realities. And you could just apply that framework to sort of this, which is you need to make the ideologies relatively resilient in the sense that they're just likely going to be believed by people to some extent. But importantly, this incentive idea applies to ideas themselves, which is the way that you hope that people would engage with an idea is just absolutely not what the fuck they're going to do. Like, guys, yeah, I'm really excited about how your ideas around how freedom of speech is arbitrary and we shouldn't really defend that right, but by doing that, might just enable fascists. That's all I'm saying. That is exactly what I'm saying. Not that obviously people don't talk about the idea of social impact and things when it comes to argumentation. In fact, I feel that's half of what the fuck is going on in modern debates is what is the social impact of blah, blah, blah. Like the left especially spend a lot of time talking about the sort of cultural impact of X decision. I just feel they're pretty poor at it. And they're pretty much just giving way more consideration to broadly trivialities versus shit that actually matters. Enter me. Yeah, so we're jumping back to the alt-right pipeline thing from the beginning. Young guy with the general irreverence of a teenage boy and the humour of a Brit. And naturally, I'm getting annoyed at people for more shit because I'm a teenager, but also the sort of authoritarian instincts of people trying to tell you what to do and enact their values, especially when it comes to telling people what to say. Sticks and stones may break my bones. Your boy took that shit to heart. So in the primary discomfort and annoyance in your life is, you're weird, don't say that, people are going to think you're stupid for saying that, oh, that's silly. If you can't tell, I'm a massive twat. Not much of a group guy, barely socialised, honestly. If you take anything away from this video, you just have to think to yourself, fucking hell, this geezer hates being told what to do. And when you have someone of my temperament and general hatred of sadistic bastards, you're basically just begging for a libertarian to be created. Alternative title, dying on a hill so hard, you create slavery by accident. But funnily enough, boys, you know what was happening right around the time where I started becoming an anarchist libertarian types? New Atheism, Charlie Hebdo, Gamergate. And you know, guess who was a massive fucking fan of video games? I should just say as well, I wasn't actually a Gamergate guy. I just really dislike these retrospectives where we talk about Gamergate as if it was solely a harassment campaign against Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn, which it almost definitely was. I just think the motivation was not that for the vast majority of people who play video games. And what I'm leading up to here is, right, why does the alt-right pipeline exist? It exists for a multitude of reasons, but I'm going to simplify for storytelling purposes. Basically, basically, you have a group of autistic teenagers who've been ostracized their entire lives for being a bit weird and saying stuff that's stupid. They've got the little video game thing, and then what happens is a bunch of people come along and start telling them that they can't do certain things or they can't say certain things, and the perception of that, because YouTube exists, is going to be religious people who are like saying, oh, you can't criticize our religion. It's a very common form of infringement of freedom of speech. Charlie Hebdo, you shouldn't be allowed to draw the Prophet Muhammad, for example. And secondarily, in the case of Gamergate, it's going to be feminists who are understandably calling for some sort of reformation in the cesspool of video games, but that's not how they're going to perceive it, right? It's just going to be, you are being an authoritarian, you're telling us what to do. And just to prove my point, you just need to look at the type of arguments that are used at the start of this pipeline. There are arguments around like rights-based analysis. People should always have a right to freedom of speech. It doesn't matter if it offends people. On like things that might be adjacent to this sort of like general milieu in like 2014, 2015, 2016 YouTube, which is like feminist cringe compilations talking about things like the wage gap or like diversity in video games or diversity generally, not just in video games. The arguments that get made against that are again liberal arguments. They're like, we should treat people in an egalitarian manner, in a manner that doesn't prejudge them based on their skin color or gender or whatever, almost to a ridiculous autistic extent, right? It's like, in the way that rights-based thinking always wants to do, it is dying on a hill. It's saying, no, this is always bad, right? This backlash to the religious people who are saying this stuff, or the SJWs as it was termed in that era, they aren't even really radical politics. They're just a logical extension, a non-vibes-based approach to what the perceived values of the society were at that time. And in theory still are. Like, the examples I gave around like bodily autonomy and stuff are still the exact arguments that we do and still use in our society all the time when talking about like abortion, drug legalization, stuff like that. And importantly, the arguments that are going to be used in the next section when attacking the fascists. And as a response to the far right and various authoritarians at that time, what was the common response from people on the left of centre? Well, they did their own form of authoritarianism, right? They did, your sort of cancel culture that now we're getting many retrospectives about in the modern world. This idea of hate speech sort of started coming about, and like how some ideas are too disturbing and dangerous to talk about in public and should be removed. The idea of hate speech sort of entered the public lexicon at this time, right? The important thing here is, right, these ideas have very clear problems that I feel just get dismissed by the left. Much like in the previous section where I talked about how Marxist-Leninists will overlook the fact that it's blatantly setting up a bad incentive structure for people to be pricks. It doesn't really get addressed the fact that, like, making a culture where you're saying, oh, you can't say that because it's against the social norms. This is like incredibly damaging for the society in general, the general freedom to say things in your society, not least of which in art, which is really why I give a fuck. When you clearly see this sort of far right move in society, I don't think the correct move is to go, well, rights don't ultimately exist, by the way, so we're going to take away your rights. Like, basically what I'm saying is, do you know what a fucking sick counter to fascism is? It's not also being authoritarian about stuff, it's dying on the hill of being an egalitarian individualist, right? I'm going to try to defend the rights and freedoms of other people, even if they are stupid. As our society moves forward, like, it might be acutely valuable to cancel these people and like deplatform them, and maybe even practically you sort of like shadow ban them, let's say, but it's just like not a good thing to be advocating, right? It's not a good thing to be putting out into the society. Most normies understand intuitively the issues with pure rights-based thinking, right? They intuitively don't think in terms of rights. That is the purview for like autistic teenagers online. The average person just thinks pragmatically, right? But that pragmatism is going to be pushed through the lens of the culture itself, and if that culture is one that just agrees with the idea that they can just enact whatever their values are with no respect for other people, then that is the thing that you're going to get out. There are many pitfalls of this pure rights-based thinking, not least of which platforming far-right people has them. But pitfalls are not giant gaping chasms through which we shove dictators and ban all forms of slightly unsocialised expression. By this, what I'm saying is, even if hypothetically some authoritarian advocation, whether it be literally authoritarian governmental policy or just the general social milieu of cancel culture, even if that did end up being good acutely, the fact that you're destroying a very resilient ideology to do that is actually incredibly damaging, probably way more so than it would have been just to let them fucking yap. Like in the case of TERFs, let's say, in the British Isles, I don't feasibly see pre-like 2020 people coming actively against trans people. The reaction would be like, yada, right? It wouldn't have been like pure hatred. It would have just been, that's a bit weird, mate. But, everyone's unique, let them do what they want. Pretty much. That's like pretty much the vibe of at least the British people that I meet, right? Like, the typical Gen X guy isn't, philosophically speaking, actually a rights-based liberal, right? He has loads of stuff that he'd violate people's rights for. The fact that the default assumption is going to be, whatever, mate, I don't have an opinion on that. That's a good thing for society. Like, obviously not everyone's going to be this, like, perfect ally. That's problematic, but he's still not fucking voting for dictators. Do you know what I mean? He's all right. You know what I mean? He's being a bit problematic. He doesn't, like, hate trans people and think that they're trying to murder women, right? This is, like, an important thing. And just going back to the Gamergate fuckers, right? I don't think that it was just about those two women, right? It was about the general idea at the time of, like, left-wing politics entering the video game sphere. And I just want to say, do you reasonably think that the kid on Xbox Live who's shouting racial slurs, as fucking stupid and, like, offensive as that might be, do you genuinely think that a lot of these people are actually racist and homophobic? Some of them are. That's not where it's coming from, right? It's coming from the perspective of, I want to be edgy, right? The fact that it's taboo is the reason they're doing it. The most childish teenage boy humour, it's why South Park exists. You know what this is. And I talked about this in my Sabrina Carpenter video about how it's just not very clear what the safe views for normies to have even are, right? It's not clear that there is any belief that you could give to the general public that wouldn't become malignant when spread out across a society. But I feel like one of the safer ones is, whatever, mate, it's not my life. If it's not hurting me, I'm going to leave them to it. Which is pretty much, from what I can tell, the typical Gen X mindset before we started trying to fucking convince them otherwise, right? Before you started going, lib. Leave the grillers alone is what I'm saying. Let the boys grill. This idea is the sort of the vague notion that boomers in your DAO might have, but they won't have when you spent the last 5+ years deconstructing liberalism and talking about how straight white men need to shut the fuck up. I want to be clear here as well, right? I think these ideas are ultimately good in some applications, and I even philosophically agree with them. I just feel like a sense of realpolitik and understanding where people are at is absolutely necessary. Because it is just, you are causing nightmare scenarios from this shit, I think. Representation in media done in a non-shit way that isn't cringe is actually a sick way for reducing discrimination and, like, various isms across your society, right? For example, I'll go watch theatre and they'll use black actresses or, like, LGBT actresses and actors on the stage, and they just don't talk about it, right? They just put them in as if it's just, like, normal, because it is. And that is, like, infinitely better than, like, Ghostbusters 2016 or whatever it was. Preaching to the choir is just, like, not a good idea when you're trying to do actual politics. I just really feel that there is this very clear link here on the alt-right pipeline between taking the piss out of the teenagers who are a bit too into South Park in the Gamergate thing and the election of Donald Trump in America. And, like, the fact that we are, like, pushing certain social ideas around trans people and LGBT people versus, like, anything else, and the working classes just seeing it as ridiculous and not caring about it, and then going and voting for, like, Nigel Farage. Thesis statement of this section, and probably the video generally, is just, even if natural rights don't ultimately exist, the social impact of telling the normies that this is not true is just going to lead to horror shows, as it has done throughout history, as it will continue to do, as we're seeing more and more with the rise of the far right. There's clearly a middle ground here of don't put fucking Nick Griffin on TV, but also probably don't cancel some fucking 18-year-old lad because he said the N-word on Xbox Live. That's really what I'm saying, ultimately. Like, I just don't think any sort of social impact type argument that you could make about the offensiveness of certain statements is ultimately ever going to beat the social impact of deconstructing liberalism across your society, which is effectively what I see people doing now. And I'm like, obviously you're going to say, well, are you saying that we should never talk about any of these, like, culture war issues? I'm definitely not saying that. I'm just saying don't talk about them in the way that's like, shut up white boy, because that's just rhetorically stupid. Like, I got these comments, I won't put them on screen because I don't want to target people, on my Sabrina Carpenter video, despite the fact I spent a good 5 minutes of that video talking about the social impact and, like, the reasons, philosophically speaking, people would say I shouldn't have made that video with the identity that I have, and people still comment telling me to shut up. And maybe I should. Realistically, it's probably better for my life that I shut up. I'm not particularly offended by that because I understand why someone would say that and I try to empathise with them, but, like, the people in my village aren't going to think that, right? The people in my village are just going to think they're the real racist. Do you know who isn't the real racist? Fucking Giorgia Maloney. You know what I mean? Like, I'm really happy to see people like Joshua Citarella and things like this being as popular as they are, because I think there's reignition of class politics over these stupid social issues that we've just been obsessed with for the past 10, 15 years is going to be way more valuable to regaining actual sanity in politics than any sort of caring about identity is going to be. Like, we need to pick our battles, right? Like, that is what I'm saying. Individually, you should behave about like this. Like, you shouldn't be going around shouting racial slurs at people because it's pretty offensive and like not very nice. As a general political platform to what to spread to the public, I think things about economics, like ownership of the means of production, let's say, if you're going to be a leftist about it, are just like way more important, guys. Like, that is like, could we just like go back to that, please? Someone like a ContraPoints has been incredibly valuable for the left and like trans people and stuff on this, because she's creating videos that are rhetorically brilliant and also being who she is, right? It's like the perfect antidote to the alt-right. I think she even had a video about this, talking about it. Do you know what has been good for the alt-right? People protesting TERF professors at British universities, or talking about how like rights don't exist, like freedom of speech doesn't exist, so we can just cancel people however we want. Like, they have not been good, right? They might be good acutely to some extent, but probably not. They're probably not good ever. So please stop doing that. Honestly, though, I am so fucking blackpilled at this point. I don't even think with the best rhetoric in the world you could convince a lot of people. Basically, all you can do is try to create a culture that incentivizes behaviour that is broadly going to be fine, and hopefully the ideas get implemented well. And I feel like the sort of boomer liberalism, with all of its stupidity, actually was that. And I don't think any sort of ideology where we're doing purity checks is that. Good luck trying to get people to be principled ultimately, but if you create a culture which incentivizes sociopathy, in the case of like cancellation, let's say, or who can be the most authoritarian bastard, that's just going to be worse for everyone. It's not going to create the world that you like. It's going to create the world in which the normies have been manipulated into these ideas the best, right? In the same way that you create incentives materially with fucking fences or whatever, you create incentives culturally for people who want to be authoritarian to not be able to succeed as well. I deliberated a lot about removing this section, and I'll be real, it was part of another video I was planning on writing. I just thought it was a prime piece of evidence to make my case that I've been making throughout this video of what happens when you let liberal values rot. And realistically, I just need to vent about it as a facts and logic pilled antisocial schizoid. So,
what's your ethnic background, if you don't mind my asking? I want to concern myself with why you care about what's happening in the U.S., first and foremost. Secondly, I have this thing. I have to stay calm, okay?
Okay.
I think things like blasphemy shouldn't be allowed per the First Amendment. I think that, quite frankly, there are a lot of legal processes.
What do you believe in?
Autocracy.
You don't condemn Nazi persecution of the Jews?
I think that there...
I describe myself as, I think, just a Christian.
Fair enough.
I'm a devout Christian.
Good to hear.
So...
I'm a fascist.
Yeah, I am.
Okay then, so what's our prediction that the goobers above were in the alt-right pipeline? I reckon pretty fucking high, to be honest. Nobody really, I think, actually has values. Very few people actually have values that they would live and die by. The round table of oralist cunts only made me feel this even more. It was not 2 years ago when American conservatives would not shut the fuck up about the American Constitution. When faced with arguments about, let's say, gun control, the retort has always been, we need our guns to defend against the case when the government goes tyrannical. We care about freedom, do you not know? We must preserve liberty at all costs. These are rights-based arguments. Okay, based. We can get behind that in the lib that I am. Government tyranny bad. I mean, I'm sat here waiting for these fuckers to burst into action upon the first sign of tyranny, but here they are defending the prick. I'll just put some examples on screen. I feel like the Trump guys probably aren't going to listen to this, but fucking observe the world around you guys. Now, as an American conservative living in Georgia, wherever the fuck, you can have a few options when you're faced with the reality of this. Which one do you reckon they'll pick, guys? Number one, realise that Trump is going against the values of the last 20 years of your political platform and condemn him. Privately, at the very least. You know, you don't have to stick your neck out for your job or whatever. I understand that you live in a fucking conservative bubble or something, but at the very least you'd say to your wife or something, oh, well, maybe, Gemma, this is a bit bad. Even better, start protests or even start forming militias, as was the intent, apparently, of the entire NRA and conservative platform in America. Fight said authoritarian, proving that the amendments actually matter and were worthwhile having. Or three, pretend it's not happening. Well, the Constitution's a 200-year document anyway. Who the fuck knows how to interpret it? It might as well be in fucking Sanskrit. Ding ding! Option number 3, every time I'm yet to see it not be the case. I'll give some defence. I saw one clip of Tommy Lauren going, maybe a bit bad, guys. Base Tommy Lauren. Fair enough, Queen. Go off. Facts and Logic, boys. Do you remember Facts and Logic? Now, here's me in a state of confusion. A certified soy rage, one might say. What the fuck was all that about then, boys? What about the Constitution? Was that not what the fucking bumper stickers were all about? At what point in one's life, when not only are you going back principally on what you said that you believed, but also using the exact same fucking arguments that you took the piss out of, not last year, do you think, wow, I am a silly little prick with no values? That should be the thing that you think. You care about freedom of speech now. Is that not what the Elon acquisition was about when you were all fucking going off about him?
Speech is under assault. The free press is under assault. Due process is under assault.
I felt the need to put this section in because of this, right? Mehdi Hassan, who's in this debate, right? He's pretending as if he's principally in favour of free speech, whereas I know him as the guy who, shortly after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, was talking about legal restrictions on free speech.
On the specific question of free speech, we have had this rather one-sided debate since last week. I know you touched on it in last week's show as well. Vince Cable made the point last week that we do have limits on free speech. Some people have been acting over the last week as if there is an absolute untrammeled right to say whatever you like, whenever you like. That's not true. There are legal limits and there are moral limits.
Like, Mehdi is clearly not behaving principally here, right? He doesn't believe in free speech because he's just spent the past fucking 20 years of his career talking about how, like, we need to have reasonable restrictions on freedom of speech publicly, which obviously I agree with him because I made the fucking argument for it in the first section, but the idea that he's pretending that this is like some massive debunk that he's always like, he's just not, right? But the fact that he is actually doing an attempt to fight the fascists in this sense, like, who is fighting the fascists here? Is it like the leftists? I don't think making fucking like left-wing meme pages on Twitter is doing that. It's Mehdi with his like Gen X boomer liberalism, right? That's what's fighting the fascists. It's him sat there in like disbelief as these people are basically saying, I don't care about individual liberty, and him going, I thought we cared about individual liberty. We did, Mehdi, until everyone fucking deconstructed it, lads. So I apologise, but that's just the world we live in now, innit? Fashion is fun, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you get your flared trousers or your battle vest or whatever, and you say, this is me, this is what I am. You know, it's very nice. People, I'm told people enjoy doing this. You know, people get a bit intense about Parker jackets or whatever it might be, but, you know, have your vibes, have your groups. I mean, people are going to do this. As do I, obviously. Okay, but the problem here, and the reason I bring up fashion, is I feel that this is just basically how people are forming beliefs on most things. It's basically why current thing exists. Something exists in the culture because of like the algos or whatever it might be, and then when current thing discourse starts happening, there'll be groups of people that form around a shared identity or something. Then they'll just regurgitate the party line. This is not a unique insight. It's just fucking maddening. Like, if you think about that fella in Georgia, right? He's probably not going to sit in the bar with his friends and argue about why Donald Trump's actions are unconstitutional. They're just going to start talking about all the talking points. It's the same reason that you'll see the same sort of tautological nonsense phrases get used on all sides in debates. It's why I'll talk to people in my everyday life about like the trans thing that the previous video was about, and I'll get people talking about like the definition of woman is simple. It's adult human female, and I know for a fact that's not a unique concept off the dome that's just been engaged with philosophically. It's just some fucking turf on Twitter has said it, and it's become the definition, right? And likewise, this sort of ridiculous philosophical belief on the left, what identity is just what you identify as, and there's nothing that thing points to, which is obviously just an empty tautology, but it's just a socially acceptable thing to say, right? Which is why that previous video, that despite the fact that everyone was quite nice about it, and I thank you all for that, would be seen as very controversial as a perspective in left-wing spaces, despite it actually being, I would like to think, a reasonable engagement with the ideas philosophically. It's unavoidable, of course, right? Humans are social and they gain knowledge socially by imitation, right? This is just what happens. I just hate it how people will be pulling full fucking ideologies off the shelves wholesale and not even antagonising it past the party line. Like, vibes are good to orient you about like what to look at, but you need to do some fucking analysis on top, guys. Come on. That's why I think the Jubilee thing was the perfect example. I mean, look at this fucking guy.
I'm a fascist.
Yeah, I am.
He's having a little identity moment, right? He's basically vibrating with excitement as he gets to go, I'm a fascist, I'm a fascist.
I am a
Catholic commentator.
I am a
Catholic commentator. This is like not the language of like sincere philosophical belief. It's the language of being able to sit there and go to some brown fella, I am that thing, look at me being spicy. All my friends are going to love this.
I frankly don't care being called a Nazi at all.
I didn't say that. I
Doesn't
didn't
matter
actually
to
say
me.
that. I said,
Are you offended? Well, I don't know, mate. I guess like war and mass slaughter are pretty offensive. Like I don't want that to happen, but I'm not like offended in this like, oh, stop saying that way. It's just like a bad thing, innit? Like, and it would be bad if it happened to you. Even that phrase, like, are you offended, pisses me off. There's not a principle there. It's like the sort of thing that he thought about when the left were being annoying and trying to cancel everyone who said anything vaguely problematic. And you'll see this in like the way that Elon behaves with the Twitter thing, right? Meanwhile, any pricks fucking talk shit about him on Twitter, immediate ban. There's no principle there, so like stop lying. They just be honest and say that you don't give a fuck. That phrase itself, like when he says, are you offended or something like this, that was the reason that I put it into the video, really. Because it was like, it so clearly made the point that this guy was obviously just some like South Park, Xbox Live N-word shouting guy. And he slowly got more and more trickled down and died on more and more hills. And to now, he's sat there talking about fucking political purges and acting as if it's unreasonable to be offended at the idea. Or like, not even offended, just be like, that's actually bad, brother. Like, why would you want that? Yes, mass slaughter is bad. Like, motherfucker. Like, let's just linger on Spasm at Jobless a bit further, right? His friend-enemy distinction is exactly the sort of thing I was talking about when authoritarians pretend that we can set up like benevolent dictators of some variety. I'm not going to get into the fucking philosophy of this idea, but effectively it's, I am like the dear leader, so he will treat me favourably. Motherfucker, there is no principle. You yourself are evidence that there is no principle, right? If you don't believe me, here's a list of high-level people that were killed in the Third Reich. Are you more of a friend than these people? So we're being clear here about like where my ire is pointed at this. Here's also a list of people killed in Stalin's purges, if you don't believe me. Are you more of a communist than Trotsky? The funniest thing about all this to me is just how, like, these anti-liberal types don't see just how fully they embody the stereotypes of those political ideologies at the time. Whether it be the far right with their, like, crunchy fascist politics now and their, like, sort of conspiracy theory type thing, and how similar that is to the Nazis in the Third Reich and, like, all their weird esoteric beliefs. Or in the case of the communists, like Enver Hoxha, where he's, like, literally just a nerd who was, like, a student, much like Trotsky. They're just the people that they are the same type of person who are talking about the hashtag not real types of Marxism, even down to the language that gets used in the revolutions, right? Even back to the Jacobins in the French Revolution. The reason for a lot of the killings was literally just, you are anti-revolutionary. It's almost exactly the same language.
You're a faggot!
I love it.
Let's face recognition. All by yourself.
At least if you protest.
One single counter-protester.
He's got some balls, man.
We love Trump! We love Trump!
Boys, for the sake of civilization, go outside. This is a brawny fan club at best. Authoritarians, as I said, have always been like this. Behind the Chad avatars and the I'm an Orthodox king, trad cath, whatever, they're some of the least competent and least intelligent individuals on the planet. It's part of the reason why they're outsourcing their bravery and thinking to a group in this way. These are and never have been the cool people. They are immensely fucking cringe people. Which is not a rational argument, to be clear. It's just like a vibe check. If we're going to do vibes, you know what I mean? Elon recently was obviously in the news for his Roman salute. But do you know where the phrase Roman salute comes from? It's because the Italian fascists started using it because it was used in films about the Roman Empire. This is literally early 20th century Naruto running. But honestly, with the fucking anime profile pictures and the lack of human contact, it wouldn't even surprise me if they did start fucking Naruto running. Rudolf Hess, a man so stupid that he decided to fly himself into British captivity. Fuck. On a solo peace mission to the British in 1941, when the Germans had effectively just conquered all of Europe, a move he does without the broader consent of the inner circle of the Third Reich, and shortly gets captured by the British forces and a very confused Scottish farmer, desperately ringing up Mussolini like, bro, I promise we're not surrendering. All because little bro wanted to be a hero, effectively. Yeah, he died in captivity at the age of 90, of course, so there you go. Everyone is brave in a crowd, basically. So when I'm talking about the community and culture being an organic system, this is why it matters. If you don't believe me on this like culturally defined belief thing, it's not a coincidence to me that all the football geezers are right wing and all the artistic types that I meet are left wing. You can only do so much personality analysis to explain that. This is me putting my values of pragmatism illustrated above into work here, right? It's not like I'm happy about the fact that people aren't just going to engage philosophically and empathetically about like every individual issue. I understand that they're not going to do that, so I'm making a video to talk about how we need to make better systems to encourage people to behave nicely. We can construct systems and ideologies that are resilient and aren't going to lead to obviously stupid outcomes. We do have some power over these cultures, maybe not as an individual, but collectively to some extent, if we be smart about it. But the left and the right have both not been behaving smartly from as far as I can tell. They have been behaving like authoritarians, which is rarely fucking smart.
I mean, what is the thing I'm advocating for here ultimately? I don't know really. I just kind of want people to behave a bit. That's going to come up a lot in my videos. I wish people behaved. You know what I mean? That is like, I mean, regardless of age, demographic, I feel like we do need to do something about the porn thing. I mean, this is pretty clear at this point. Get off the hub, boys. You know what I mean? But I just feel that the solutions to this stuff are probably more found in culture than they are found in like the power of the state. Let's say, like if you look at like the red pill spaces, movements like NoFap, I actually think are quite valuable in this way because they are going to be more rhetorically useful towards the demographics of people in which are doing the most fapping. Gamers is what I'm saying. Legally speaking though, especially in the British Isles, as I've said previously, I think it's very common for people to use like the nuclear option. The nuclear option being government force you to not do a thing without respecting the issues of using such a hammer. And this is where I want to bring in this principle, which I think is useful in situations like this, when there's probably a good reason to stop people doing something and you want to like just tell people not to do it through the state. That principle being, we should by default treat the fact that the government is intervening as a bad thing. Like, a priori, that should be seen as bad. Therefore, we should err on the side of not doing that in situations where we're not really sure whether it's valid to do so. View the government as the libertarians do. I mean, as I said previously, unlike the libertarians, I'm not defending stuff until it creates some fucking slave state. But I hope that I've, like, sufficiently convinced you that caring about natural rights and sort of values in and of themselves, even if the acute outcome could be seen as beneficial, has a benefit in the long run. It's a more resilient system to behave that way. However, the important thing here is we need to analyse the scope of the issue. So unlike the British, where we're banning dog breeds over 7 people, I think that we need to like really look into the fact of, should we be banning XL bullies? Probably not. But should we be forcing companies to tell you what's in the food and stopping them putting poison in it? Or like stopping people legally from doing heinous things? Like, that probably is valid. I'm just not convinced the porn thing probably raises that level. I think the porn thing is the right-wing equivalent of what a lot of the sort of feminist arguing around the social impact of exes in a lot of these online discourses. As I mentioned previously in the Sabrina Carpenter video, that discourse strikes me as one of these, which is people focusing on the sort of social impact of something that is sort of could go either way. I'm not quite sure whether that actually could be a valid thing to worry about. Like, that reasonability thing, I think people do by default. I think by default people want to go, fuck it, we'll just solve it. Enough said. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you just get the government and you go, fucking stop that. And basically what happens when you install that culture is what happens with the British, where any minor inconvenience of someone's life happens and we've got a fucking government body created about it. It is only made worse by people basically flippantly doing away with people's liberty and pretending as if liberty doesn't matter. So yeah, basically, as expected, the most centrist take of all time. But I'm pretty extreme about this centrist thing, so fight me about it, you know what I mean? The important takeaway from this video is these values are very easy to do away with. In the state of nature, these values would naturally be done away with. We should behave less flippantly with them because of that. Basically, I don't think gooning reaches the level where we're going to be like, fucking stop that, basically. But there probably is some, there probably is something we should do about it. Encourage NoFap, I guess. I don't know. It's very difficult. I mean, start kink shaming. That's one option, maybe. No? But yeah, that's it. Sort of, what you need to do is you need to become a libertarian and then not be any more like me, and then you'll be all right. Basically, that's what I'm saying. Anyway, hope you enjoyed, guys. Yeah, that was quite long.